May 5th, 1945. The war in Europe is almost over. Allied forces have just broken through the gates of a forgotten hell in the Austrian Alps, a place called Ebensee. The SS guards, most of them have already run. They packed their bags, burned their records, and disappeared into the mountains like cowards in the dark. But one of them, one man, didn't make it out in time. He was caught. And what happened next was witnessed by a man who would later stand before the Nuremberg Trials as one of the most important prosecutors in human history. He watched everything, and he did nothing to stop it. Welcome to Darkroom Archive, where history doesn't get cleaned up for you. Today, we're going deep into one of the most morally raw, emotionally complicated moments of World War II. A moment that forces you to ask, when does justice become revenge? And does it even matter? The story you're about to hear is real. It is documented by eyewitnesses. It is confirmed by one of the most credible legal minds of the 20th century. And it happened inside a crematorium, the very same building that had swallowed thousands of innocent lives before it. Stay with me, because this one is going to get uncomfortable. If this is your first time here, please subscribe to support the channel. Now let's back to Ebensee. You need to understand what this place was before you can understand what happened inside it. Ebensee was not just a concentration camp, it was a machine. Established in November 1943 in the mountains of Upper Austria, it was a subcamp of Mauthausen, one of the harshest camp systems in the entire Nazi network. Its purpose? The prisoners were forced to carve massive underground tunnels through solid granite mountains, by hand, by hammer, by sheer human suffering. The Nazis wanted these tunnels to house armaments factories, secret weapons programs, even a project to build a bomber that could strike New York City. Let that settle. The men dying inside these tunnels were being worked to death so Germany could bomb New York. When the first 1,000 prisoners arrived from Mauthausen in November 1943, there was almost no shelter, no barracks, no protection from the brutal alpine winter bodies piled up faster than they could be burned. By April 1945, the death rate at Ebensee reached approximately 150 people per day, 350 human beings dying every single day. One building, Block 23, became so overcrowded with the dead and dying that on a single day in April 1945, 80 corpses were removed from it alone. Workers reported that among the bodies, feet were still twitching, people being collected with the dead while still barely alive. That is the world this story lives in. As Allied forces closed in on Austria in the final days of the war, the SS at Ebensee knew it was over. The camp commandant, Anton Ganz, attempted one final act of mass murder. He ordered the prisoners to march into the mountain tunnels for their protection. The prisoners refused. These broken, starving men who had watched 8,200 of their fellow inmates die within those walls, looked at the tunnel entrance and said no. They were right to say no. When American forces arrived and inspected the tunnels, they found them packed with explosives. The prisoners had refused to walk into their own mass grave. And then the gates opened. The SS guards fled. Most vanished into the surrounding mountains and forests. The camp staff abandoned their posts so fast that when the Americans arrived, the only people guarding Ebensee were elderly German men with rifles, men who had no idea what to do. The SS had left their own war crimes behind, but not everyone escaped. Among the chaos of Liberation Day, survivors moved through the grounds of a camp that had been their prison for years. Some wept, some collapsed, some just stood there, blinking in the mountain sunlight, processing the impossible fact that they were still alive. But liberation also meant reckoning. The prisoners began hunting down the people who had made their lives hell, not just the SS guards who had fled, but the prisoner functionaries who had stayed, the Capos, the block leaders, the men who had beaten, starved, and reported their fellow inmates to keep themselves alive. 52 of them were killed that day, and one search lasted longer than all the others. The prisoners were looking for a man known as Tishan, a capo who had spent years brutalizing the inmates under his watch, a man whose survivors remembered for his extraordinary cruelty, a man who thought he could hide. They found him trying to escape through the camp perimeter, and what happened next would be documented by multiple eyewitnesses, including a young American officer who would go on to prosecute war criminals at Nuremberg. What history has preserved is what happened next. The prisoners caught him. They beat him mercilessly, with their hands, with whatever they could find. Then they dragged him across the campgrounds, past Block 23, where the dying lay in heaps, past the mass graves dug in the final weeks, past the chimneys that had burned for years, and they brought him to the crematorium. Now pay attention here, because this is where the documented eyewitness account enters the story. His name was Ben Ferenc. He was 25 years old. He was a sergeant and war crimes investigator, a man who had already walked through Buchenwald, who had already peered into hell, as he himself would later write. He was at Ebensee directing a group of local German civilians to help bury the bodies scattered across the grounds. And then he saw it. The mob tied the guard to one of the metal trays, the same trays that had been used for years to slide bodies into the furnace. They lit the oven, and they roasted him alive, taking him in and out of the oven multiple times to extend the suffering, or to make sure he understood every second of what was happening to him. His screams were heard across the camp. Ben Ferenc watched the entire thing, and in his own words he would carry for the rest of his very long life, he wrote, "I watched it happen and did nothing. It was not my duty to stop it, even if I could have, and frankly, I was not inclined to try." Now let's step back, because a journalist, a real one, doesn't just tell you what happened. They ask you to sit with the uncomfortable questions. Was this justice? These were men who had watched their families murdered, men who had spent years being treated as less than human by the very system this guard represented. Men who had refused to walk into an exploded tunnel 20 minutes before this happened. On a human level, you understand it. But here is the other side of this story, and it matters. Ben Ferenc himself would spend the rest of his life as the world's most passionate advocate for international law and the Nuremberg Trials, precisely because of moments like this one. His whole argument was built on a single idea that civilized justice must replace raw revenge, even when raw revenge feels completely earned. The guard who was burned alive in that oven, he may well have been responsible for unspeakable crimes. He may have been the commandant who ordered those mass graves. He may have been one of the men who beat prisoners to death on a whim, or, and this is the uncomfortable part, he may have been a lower-ranking guard caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment, in a mob that could not distinguish between individual guilt and collective identity. We don't know. And that uncertainty is precisely why Ferenc believed the trial mattered more than the torch. Because in a courtroom, you find out who the person actually was. You build a record, you create history, you close the door properly. In a crematorium, in the rage of liberation morning, you close the door, but you don't know exactly what was behind it. Ben Ferenc went on to become the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg Einsatzgruppen trial, the largest murder trial in history. He won convictions against 22 SS commanders, all of them guilty of mass murder on an industrial scale. He lived to be 103 years old. He never stopped talking about the need for law over violence, for accountability over revenge. But he also never denied what he felt on that day in Ebensee. He didn't try to stop it, and he said, quietly, honestly, that he wasn't inclined to. That is the human truth at the center of this story. Not the flames, not the screaming, not the oven. It's the 25-year-old man standing in the Austrian sunshine, watching and feeling nothing he was ashamed of. History doesn't always give us clean heroes. Sometimes it gives us survivors, sometimes it gives us witnesses, and sometimes it gives us a moment so raw and real that you have to sit with it for years before you know what to do with it. This was one of those moments. If this video made you think, not just feel, but think, then this channel is doing its job. Subscribe to Darkroom Archive. Share this with someone who thinks they know World War II, and leave a comment below. Do you think what happened in that crematorium was justice, or was it something else? I'll see you in the next video.